Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's service. God is using the ministry of Lakeside to change so many people's lives, and we are hearing many stories of life change and would love to hear yours as well. If God has used the ministry of Lakeside to change your life and make a difference, then please email us at amen@lakesidechurch.ca.
Well, good morning, everyone. Extend my welcome to all of you here and those of you who are watching in the cafe and those of you who are watching online. We're so glad to have all of you connecting with us this morning as we are working our way through this topic of wrestling with fear that we began last week. And I found it very interesting that there was a lot of feedback and a lot of email and a lot of conversations I had with people after last week about how it really impacted them and how the message really kind of gave them some hope and gave them some guidance when it comes to this area of fear. And it shouldn't have surprised me because fear is that universal thing that all of us wrestle with. None of us are immune from this issue of fear. Fear affects every one of us in different ways. Sometimes it's physical, sometimes it's emotional, but it affects us. Fear affects all of us. And that is why in the Bible, the number one most dominant command, it's not love God, it's not love others, but it's fear not. Fear not is given to us 365 times, and often it is followed with these words, "For I am with you." God says, you have nothing to fear because of my presence, because I'm with you. Now, not all fear is bad. There's a good kind of fear, a fear that we need to survive, a fear that kind of alerts us to danger, that teaches us to respect appropriate boundaries. It's the kind of fear that keeps us away from those very things that can harm us. So there's a good aspect of fear, and we need that aspect. But I don't think this is what the fear not commands are about. They're not talking about that kind of fear. They're talking about that kind of fear that grips a hold of us and kind of gets down inside of our being and our psyche and can cause us to make decisions and choices that later on we regret and wonder, why did that happen? And why was that such a bad decision? And I believe that most of the bad decisions that you and I make in life and have regret over later have something to do with fear. And I think it's that the words fear not are applied to. And we talked about those kind of fears that all of us experience. Fear of failure, fear of intimacy, fear of being single, the fear of rejection, the fear of commitment, the health fear, fear of being abandoned. There's there's all kinds of those fears that all of us wrestle with from time to time. But I think in all of us, there's one fear or two fears that are a little more dominant than the other. But one fear that I think that every person in this room wrestles with is the fear of the future. Because sometimes we look into the future, we look next week, next month, next year, and we say, that doesn't look like it's going to turn out well. That doesn't look like it's going to be really a good thing. The odds are against it of having a positive outcome. And we get this uncertainty, we get this anxiety, and we have little hope, and we think it's not going to get any better. And fear gets a grip of us, that fear of the future. And I think all of us would say from time to time, we've experienced that. And next week, I want to dig into that topic, the idea of the fear of the future. And I want to look at a single prayer in the Bible that I think if we commit ourselves to, that we could even do battle with the fear of the future. As I said, that when we give into bad fear, the kind of those fears that, not the good fear, but the bad fear, often it leads us to making decisions that are decisions of compromise. We make a decision and to ignore or disobey, one of God's guidelines or directives or commands or the way He wants us to live. And so we compromise in an act of disobedience because of some aspect of fear, and then we pay a price. There's a consequence that follows. I talked about the consequences last week. I think the big consequence is that when we give in to fear and we don't trust God, what happens is we miss out on the opportunity for God to do exactly what He wanted to do in that situation. We preempt that opportunity and we miss it. And because we never get the chance to experience it again because we gave into our fear and missed an opportunity, allowing God to work in that area of our lives. I think there are these ripple effects, these consequences that affect us but affect others and affect those especially close to us. I said that there was that consequence where the very thing that we were afraid of losing, we end up losing. And I used the example last week of parents who are so afraid of losing their children that they smother them and they sort of hover over them and they control everything they do. And they give them no space and no, ability to breathe on their own. And later on, when those kids become teenagers a little later, they walk out of that home. And the very thing those parents feared because they gave in to the fear and reacted and responded because of fear, very thing they were afraid of losing, they lose. As I said, there's one other thing that is a real big consequence too, and that is what it does to our relationship with God. Because when we give in to fear, we're saying to God, hey, God, I don't trust you. I gave in to fear because I don't really trust you. I don't trust you in this area of my life where I am most afraid. And as I said last week, and I think this is a key point, sort of the tweet point out of the message last week, the thing we fear the most is the thing we trust God with the least. Where I fear the most is where I trust God the least. That's what happens when it comes to fear. Trust hurts our relationship between us and God. And it can have some serious side effects and consequences when we give in to fear. And it really comes down to a choice of a mindset. That when something happens that causes me to fear, one mindset is this: I can choose to transfer my trust over to God, believing He's wise and sovereign and powerful, that He has it all in control, He knows the future, He wants the very best for me, He's loving and gracious. And I can choose, because of who God is, to transfer my trust over to God. I can have that mindset, or I can simply give in to fear, and I can either try to do whatever it takes to minimize that fear, make some kind of compromising choice, or I can just learn to live with the fear. But it's a mindset, and fear is really something mental. It's in our minds. It is not the circumstances that cause us to fear. It isn't. We know that's true. It's not the circumstance. Some people say, my circumstances were different, I wouldn't be as afraid. No, that's not true. Because fear has very little to do with the circumstances. Fear has everything to do about how we think about those circumstances. It is about our perspective. It's about our mindset. Fear is not something in a reality in our circumstances. It is a reality in our minds. And because we know that one group of people don't fear some things and yet another group are terrified. We go, it's the same thing. Why is that? Because it's a mindset. It's something that takes place in our mind. And if we're going to do battle with fear, we got to do battle in the mind. It is not about changing our circumstances. Now, when it comes to fear, and I think many of us might have difficulty admitting this morning, but I think what most of us fear the most, what is behind most of the bad fear that we experience, is this: the loss of control. I think it's the loss of control that creates some of the deepest fears in us. We fear that our lives are going to be out of control. We fear they're beyond our control. We fear that we're under the control of another human being, and we're not sure we can handle it. If life gets out of control and beyond my control, I feel like I am powerless. And when I feel powerless over something I can't control, that creates in me the greatest fear. I think a lot of us think that way. I think that when we're out of control and we have this inability to handle it, the loss of control or being out of control and not dealing with it or able to deal with it, that creates the greatest amount of fear. It really does. And we don't like to be out of control or not in control or under the control of it. We don't like that. Because so often we feel powerless. And the idea of being out of control and our feelings of not able to handle it or feeling powerless is what creates in most of us the deepest fears. It really does. Therefore, because a lack of control or out of control or being under control of someone else creates the greatest amount of fear, we will do everything to try to maintain control. We'll use whatever energy, focus, and resources we have available to maintain control because we're not sure if we can handle it. If we're out of control, we feel powerless, and that creates fear. And that's why money and security get so tied together in the thinking of so many people, because it's this idea, if I have enough money, I will have security, and if I have that kind of security, I have nothing to fear. Because we think if we can control our circumstances with money, we won't have anything to fear. It's about being in control. And because that idea of being out of control and being powerless to deal with it creates the most amount of fear, some of us have become control freaks. I'm speaking for myself. And maybe you're married to a control freak. Now, there's no nudging of elbows here at this moment. It's not allowed. But you know what it's like? When we feel like life could be out of control, we try to control our circumstances. We try to control the outcomes. We try to control people around us. We need to have it our way. We're always manipulating and controlling others to maintain control of the circumstances around us, all driven by the fear of being out of control and feeling powerless because of it. For some of us, the thought of being out of control takes us back to a time when we were out of control, or when our lives felt like they were out of control, or we were under the thumb of someone who was a controller. And we go back to those painful moments and we go, I hated that. I hated the fear that came with it. I hated life like that. I hated those relational dynamics. And that's never going to happen to me again. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to maintain control because I'm so afraid of life out of control and not being able to handle it. Wouldn't you love to be freed from all of that? Wouldn't you love this morning to be liberated from having to always feel like you have to be in total control of everything in your life simply because of fear? I know I would. I want to find liberation and freedom, and I believe many of you do as well. I mean, imagine what not having to strive to maintain control or fight control or manipulate to keep control would do to your relationships, because that's what it affects the most, and the other areas of your life. Imagine what not having to be in control all the time would feel like. It is the fear of losing control and trying to maintain it that gets in the way of having great relationships. I mean, nobody wants to be connected in relationship with a controller. And it wreaks havoc with those relationships that are closest to us because we're always fighting to maintain control, and it's out of fear. And the reason I think that some of you here this morning, you don't want a relationship with God is because it's a fear of losing control. Because you're afraid if you surrender to God and give God control, you won't be in control, and God will ask you to do things and go places and say things and do whatever. And you're afraid of giving control over to God. You don't like to give control over to anyone. And it stands in the way of you wanting to have a deep personal relationship with God. And yet life would be so much better, wouldn't it, if we didn't have to maintain control because of the fear that we feel. Well, here I want to just share this, and you know this to be true, but I just need to be honest with you this morning. None of us controls life. The idea of being in control of your life is a myth. It is a myth. None of us can really control our lives. Oh, we can control some of the little things, but we definitely can't control the big things. And things can be going so well, can't they? And in an instant, the circumstantial winds blow, and they change without warning. And no longer can we maintain control. You know what that's like. I think all of us know that there are times when the circumstances come and those storm winds blow, and we're out of control. And no matter what we do, we can't maintain control because you can't always maintain control. That is a myth. And that's a myth. Because you and I aren't in control of the circumstances of life. We're not controlling the decisions of others. We're not in control, with what others do. We're not in control when bad news comes. And if we're so afraid of losing control because we're powerless to handle it, and we live in that kind of fear, it can overwhelm us when life slips out of control. And there's this great story in Mark chapter 4. It's one of the famous Jesus stories. If you've been around church any length of time, you went to Sunday school or something like that in a church, you've heard this story of Jesus. It's a fairly familiar one. It's found in Mark chapter 4. And Jesus has had a busy day of ministry with his closest followers, and they've ministered to thousands of people. And it's just been an intense time, especially for Jesus. He's been preaching and healing and touching and talking and conversing, but the disciples have been helping with that as well. And Jesus says, you know what, we're exhausted. We're going to go across the lake. We're going to camp out on the other side tonight. That's where we're going to find our rest. And when Jesus talks about going across the lake, he's talking about the Sea of Galilee. It's about 13 miles in length and about 7 miles in width, and they're probably going from one side of the 7 miles to the other. So they're taking about a 7-mile voyage. And we have to remember that as Mark writes this, Mark is writing it 25 years later. He's not writing it dictating it as it happened, but he's writing it later to an audience, and he has that audience in mind. And it's an audience that's going through some very stormy weather, some very difficult, challenging circumstances at the hands of the Romans. And so what he writes to them, and he writes with such beautiful detail. And sometimes when we read stories like this, we skip over the detail. And I want to make sure that we don't do that this morning. So let's look at the story. It says that on that day, when evening had come, they had been ministering to thousands. He said to them, it's Jesus speaking, he's the he in the story. He said to them, let us go across to the other side. Let's go across to the other side. Now, what Mark is trying to make clear here is that Jesus is giving the orders. Jesus is taking charge. Jesus is setting the agenda. Jesus is giving them direction. And he wants them to know that whatever goes on later on in this story, that he wants them to know that this isn't because they made an unwise decision. This isn't because they were disobedient. This happened because Jesus wanted it to happen. They obeyed Jesus fully, and they find themselves in these circumstances. And he wants us to know that this is Jesus' plan. Jesus pointed the direction, and they simply followed. He says this, and leaving the crowd. Now, why he says this, he wants to, again, to help us identify who these people are. It's not the crowd. The crowd had gathered, and many in that crowd were not followers of Jesus. Many of them were new followers, but none of them were really close to Jesus in the crowd. And so he says when they were leaving the crowd, he's talking about a special group, a small group of the closest followers of Jesus. That's what he's talking about. And he says this little crowd who Jesus loved and cared for and had great concern for and compassion over. These are the ones he was discipling. These are the ones that go with him. He wants to make sure that what happens down in this story, when we read part of it, that we don't confuse that this is something about the lack of love or the lack of closeness with those who are going across the water. And then he goes on and he says, and they took Jesus. Jesus was with them. In case anybody was wondering, where's Jesus in the story? He's with them in the boat, the one boat, the main boat where the story takes place, just as he was. And other boats were with him. And the reason he says this is to add credibility to the story. Because later on, people are going to read the story, and if there was one boat and Jesus was in it, they're going, this little group, the closest group in that one boat, they made the story up. It was some sort of a mirage, some sort of an illusion. Maybe it was just a coincidence. He's saying, no, there's credibility to this story. When you read this and what happens and see the miracle that happens, you need to know there is credibility because there were other boats there. And they witnessed it. And just go and ask them, Mark would say. Just go and ask them. And they will tell you that it really happened. And then it says this, and a great windstorm arose. Now, storms on the Sea of Galilee happened in an instant because of the way it is positioned geographically. It is in this sort of low bowl or basin, 365 feet below sea level, and there are mountains on the west, and what happens is the wind blows through these mountains, and it creates this intense wind tunnel kind of an effect. And because it's below sea level, it has this kind of significant downdraft. And when these storms would blow up, there would be thunder and lightning because of the weather conditions, and the waves on the sea would get up to about as much as 7 or 8 feet. So it was a significant kinds of storms would blow in. And this is the kind of storm that is happening here. It is a great windstorm, and it arose. And why he uses this word is he's saying, and by the way, these experienced sailors didn't know what was coming, and it wasn't because of their negligence or they didn't check the weather. He said it arose. It happened in an instant. It happened without warning. And I've seen this happen firsthand. A couple of years ago when I was on sabbatical down in Florida, I was staying at this beautiful home on the water. And I was sitting there. It was a beautiful sunny day. And all of a sudden looked off in the horizon across the kind of the ocean kind of lake thing that's in front of the house. And I could see it getting darker and darker and darker. And then it went pitch black. And you could see this storm traveling across the water. And when it hit the house where I was staying, the waves were 4 or 5 feet. And they were splashing over the break wall. And it was lightning and it was thunder. And in fact, all the netting, they had all this netting around the swimming pool, it was torn right off. And it happened, and in about 10 minutes, it went the other way and it was gone. And I thought to myself, there were probably a lot of people out on boats who didn't see this coming on that water. I wonder what it was like to be on the water while the storm was on. my first thought was, it was terrifying. And I get what these guys were feeling. This storm comes up, and it says this, that the waves were breaking into the boat. In other words, they're over the side of the boat, and the boat was already filling. And you can just see this, that they got the buckets in their hands, and they're trying to get the water out, but it's coming in faster than they can handle. And the boat is taking on more water than they can kind of scoop out, and the boat begins to sink. And the storm is out of control. And these are experienced fishermen. They've been in storms before, but this one is maybe the fiercest they've ever been. And they do in the middle of a storm like we do in the middle of a circumstantial storm. They go, where's Jesus? And it tells us where Jesus is. He was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. Now, it wasn't like he brought his pillow and was sleeping at the back of the boat, in case that's how you picture this. These ideas of the cushions, these were sandbags filled for ballast, and they were at the back of the boat, and they would use them to balance the boat out. And Jesus is sleeping on these sandbags, and the rain is coming, and the storm's blowing, and you wonder, how could anybody sleep in that storm? And their reaction is our reaction. When the storms of life come, their reaction is our reaction. When we think life is out of control and we are powerless to handle it, we say the same words, Jesus, do you not care that we are perishing? Jesus, we're out of control. Life is getting dark. We're going to sink. We're overwhelmed. We can't handle it. And we utter these kind of words when the storms of life come for all of us, when it's beyond our ability to handle it, when the circumstances seem dark and bleak, and the storms are blowing hard. We say, Jesus, where are you? And do you really care? Do you really care, Jesus? Or are you indifferent? Are you asleep in the boat? We wonder, Jesus, where are you? Why is this happening? Why aren't you helping? Happens to all of us, doesn't it? And sometimes we speak it privately. Sometimes we just think it because we're supposed to be Christ followers, many of us. And we're supposed to give the impression that we're okay. And so we fire off a whole bunch of well-worn cliches like God can handle it. God knows what he's doing. God will work it out for my good. And we say these things outwardly. Inwardly, we're a mess. And we're wondering, God, do you really care about the storm that is happening to me? Where are you? Why aren't you doing something? Because that's our natural reaction when life gets out of control, is the first question we ask. If we have a relationship with God, is God, where are you and why aren't you handling this? And it can happen in an instant. And we can question God, where are you and do you really care? Right? Storms can come without warning. Winds can blow and our little boat, lifeboat, takes on water. And we start to sink and fear grips and we wonder, God, where are you? We do. Right? Everything can be calm in a marriage. And then an affair storm blows. The words separation and divorce get used. And we wonder, do you care, Jesus? And where are you? Why aren't you doing something about this? Or it can be a calm in your job and then the economy turns and there's layoffs and you're caught up in this. You've been out of work for a while and you have a mortgage to pay and bills to pay and cars to pay for. And you start to wonder, where are you, Jesus? Where are you? Why aren't you doing something about this? Do you really care? Or maybe it's on the health front. You or someone you know gets a diagnosis and the storms begin to blow and you feel fear and you say, do you care, Jesus? Where are you? Or maybe it's a bad choice or decision that you made. Maybe it's a self-inflicted storm. And an area of your life that seems so calm is now so stormy. And you wonder, where are you, God? You're supposed to be merciful and forgiving. And I know this is not about you getting even with me or I'm paying the price. I just want to know, where are you in the middle of the storm? Because I think that when life gets out of control, we all pray a prayer like, God, please intervene. And when he doesn't seem to, we wonder, does he care? Is he asleep in the boat? Is he? And the story goes on. And he awoke. They woke him, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, peace, be still. And the winds ceased, and there was a great calm. But I got this funny feeling. You know, I've seen it, looks like the scene from Titanic that's got Jesus on the front of the boat like this. I don't think it happened like that at all. I think Jesus kind of looked up, sat up and he saw these faces of these terrified men. And he looks out at the waves and the wind and he goes, "Peace, be still." But I think he looks at their eyes and says exactly the same thing to them. In the middle of the storm, he looks at them and says, "Peace, be at peace, be still, calm what's going on in the inside of you." You see, sometimes he calms the storm, just like this one. Goes away in an instant. But other times he doesn't calm the storm in an instant, but he looks into us and says, you can be calm on the inside. You can feel peace and you can be still. Even when the circumstances don't change, even when the storm blows, you can still find peace. It is possible. Jesus said these words, John 16:33. I've told you these things. He's saying these things are persecutions coming, storms are going to blow, it's going to be hard, it's going to be challenging, I'm going to be leaving physically. I've told you these things, he says. So that what? In me, that later on will be Paul's idea of abiding. And John has this idea of abiding, being connected, vine to branch, connected with Jesus. That in me, connected with me, you may have peace. In this world versus in me, in this world, you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world. He's saying it depends on where you're going to seek peace. Are you going to seek it in me, in a relationship with me, or are you going to seek it in the world? Because in this world, you're not going to find much peace because there's going to be trouble. But if you seek it in me, you can find peace no matter what, no matter how hard the storm winds blow. You find it in me. That's where you find peace, even in this world when you have trouble. Earlier on in the same sort of dialogue about peace, Jesus says these words, "Peace I leave with you. I'm going, but I'm leaving you with peace. My peace, my kind of peace, my way of giving you peace. I'm handing it over to you. I don't give you as the world gives." See, the world's idea of peace is calm the circumstances, calm the storm. There is no peace in the storm. Jesus said, oh, no. There is peace in the storm. You can have, the Bible says, a peace that transcends all understanding. So when the storm blows and people look at you and you have peace, they go, you got to be nutty. You should be in turmoil. You should be overwhelmed. And you say, I'm not. Why not? Because in Jesus I have peace. And it is possible to have peace in the middle of the storm. This is why Jesus slept in the boat. You wonder how he could? Because he's got peace. Peace in the middle of the storm, and he offers that same peace to us. The story goes on. Jesus said to them, "Why are you afraid?" And you're kind of going, hold it a second, Jesus, that's a silly question. What do you mean, why are we afraid? Yeah, you were sleeping while the storm is on. We've been bailing water, Jesus. Do you know how hard it's been? That storm is out of control. Do you get it, Jesus? It's been difficult. It was hard. We thought we were going to drown. Why do you think we were afraid? Life was out of control, Jesus, and we were powerless to handle any of it. And you were sleeping in the boat. What do you think we're afraid? Seems like a silly question Jesus asked. And then he asked this question, have you, and this is the key word, have you still no faith? And what Jesus is saying to them is, I was in the boat with you, right there with you, and you did not have the faith that you needed. See, when he talks about faith, he's not talking about faith generally. He is talking about faith in him. He could have said, have you still no faith in me? I was right there in the boat with you. I wasn't asleep because of indifference. It's not a lack of concern, Jesus says. Storms just don't scare me like they scare you, because I'm in control of the storms. I have power over the storms. One word from me and the storms stop. And you can find peace in the middle of them in me. But what he's really saying is, you just don't get who I am. I'm God in human flesh. I'm the creator. I'm powerful. I control all things. I know what I'm doing. I love you. I care for you. I want the best for you. I see the big picture. I know the future. I know it's all going to turn out. But you still don't get it because you don't have faith in me. You don't get who I am. Jesus is kind of going, haven't you seen already what I've done? Man, that water into wine deal should have been enough to convince you. Since then, I've healed a whole bunch of lepers. There's that guy with a withered hand. You remember that one? There's those people with demon possession. I cleared the demons out. There were those who had emotional and physical ailments, and I healed them. There's that guy paralyzed from birth. I just did that one a couple days ago. He's walking today and telling everybody about it. Don't you get who I am? And I calmed their storm. Didn't you get that I could calm your storm as well? You just didn't trust me. You didn't get it. You still don't have faith. And sometimes it's hard to look back when we're in the middle of one storm. And he's saying to them, you needed to look back when other people had storms and when you had storms, because I was there to calm them. And that's what he wants us to do, is to look back. Jesus says, you don't need to be afraid. I'm with you. You just needed to have faith in me. You need to have faith in me. Jesus is saying to them, just because life is spinning out of control, you have nothing to fear, because we're going through this together. And I'm in the boat with you when the storms come, and I'm more powerful than the storm. Do you get that? And Jesus kind of saying to them, as long as you think you need to be in control all the time, when the storms come, you'll be afraid. But I'm trying to teach you that when life is out of control, you don't have to be afraid. You don't have to worry about control all, because I'm in control. And that would be a great place to live, wouldn't it be? Wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be great to live there? To go, life's out of control, I'm okay. I'm okay. Because Jesus is with me in this. And Jesus is using this as a critical life lesson to these guys. He is. Because later on, the circumstantial storms are going to blow hard into their lives. Most of them are either going to be put to death for what they believe and persecuted on the way, or going to be exiled to live on islands for years and years and years. And Jesus knew that if the circumstantial winds blew and they bailed on faith, that this movement that he was starting would not continue, and it was critical to learn the lesson. I think he planned the trip. I think he planned the storm. I think it was all about teaching them a lesson. And Jesus taught them one key lesson that day, a lesson that all of us need to take to heart ourselves. And here's the key lesson. A life out of control doesn't mean that God is not in control. When life is out of control, it does not mean that God is not in control. Just because life is outside of your control doesn't mean it's outside of God's control. But our natural inclination sometimes is to think, well, life is out of control and I can't handle it, and we kind of go, I don't think God can either. I can't handle it, neither can God. I'm powerless in the storm, God must be powerless. That's why God isn't stilling the storm. And we equate a life out of control meaning that God is out of control. And we have to learn to separate these two ideas, that life can spin totally out of control. It can. For many of us, it will at some point or one point or another. But even when it spins out of control, it doesn't mean God is out of control. No, it means that God is completely in control. And just because you're no longer in control doesn't mean that God is no longer in control. And it's learning to shift our trust from our ability to manage and control our lives over to God's ability to manage and control our lives. See, because sometimes it's out of control and we can't handle it and we are powerless, but he is totally in control, he is totally powerful, and he can handle it. And we say, I can't do it, I'm no longer going to hold on to this, I'm not going to be afraid because I don't need to control it anymore, I don't need to handle it, I don't need the power to make it change, I just have to go, Jesus, he can do it. He can do it. And it says in the story, and they were filled with great fear. If you were to translate this purely, it would be this, and they were fearful with a great fear. They had a unique kind of fear at this moment. And it's what we talked about last week. This is about the fear of the Lord. This is not dread or terror because of the storm, but this is a reverence and an awe for who Jesus is, who God is. It is a reverence and awe because of who he is and what he could do. And this was a defining moment in their lives because they realized when they were out of control, they finally realized that God was in control, completely in control, and he could handle the outcome. They realized in this moment that God was Jesus was who he said he was all the way along, that he was God in the flesh, controls all things, loved them dearly, cared for them completely, directs their lives, wants the very best. He's a God who is wise, God who knows how it plays out, God who sees the future, God who is powerful, God who can make anything happen, and they finally got it. And it became so much about this moment that they finally could say, oh, we don't have to be in control because he is. We don't need to handle it because he does. We don't have to worry about being powerless because he's powerful. They finally got it. And these guys went on to change the world. And I think this is one of the most defining moments because they realized that when life is out of control, God is still in control. And they didn't worry as much when the storms come. Sometimes we will have fear when future storms come. Like they didn't get it and had no fear. They had that internal kind of fear. But it didn't overwhelm them, and they didn't make poor decisions because of them, because they were able in those new moments of fear to go, oh, man, remember that storm? We weren't in control, but he was. We were powerless, but he was powerful. We couldn't handle it, but he did. And every time they faced a fearful storm from that point on, they could go back to this and go, you remember? See, life out of control does not equate with God being out of control. Being powerless and not being able to handle it doesn't mean that God is powerless and can't handle it. And these guys finally realized that you can't confuse your ability to control with God's ability to control. You just can't. You just can't do that because God controls the outcome. God is powerful. God can handle it. There's nothing to fear. And they found it so freeing, and I think so will we. When we really realize that our ability to control is a joke. Because we just can't always control life, but God's ability to control is a reality. See, some of us think I can control outcomes and I can control people and I can control my circumstances. No, you can't. In small ways, maybe. But life will be out of control for all of us one day, many days. And you won't be able to handle it, and you will be powerless, and you have to choose what you're going to do. And you can make some pretty poor decisions and live with the regrets, or you can say, okay, it's out of control, I'm powerless, I can't handle it. But he is in control, he is powerful, and he can. And I'm just going to transfer trust. You see, here's the reality, is that no matter what you go through, no matter what storm you're going through, relationally, financially, vocationally, with your health, with whatever, you're not alone in the boat. He's in the boat with you. And that's why a writer like Paul, who's in prison, can write words like this. I can do everything, all things, everything. There isn't a thing that I can't do. Through, you could do the words with. The Greek through and with are interchangeable. I can do everything with him, through him, by him who gives me strength. I don't do it in my own strength. It's his strength, and I do it with him. I do it with him. Because he's in the boat. And being in control is a myth. Because you cannot control the choices of another person. You can't control the outcome of a legal matter. You can't control a significant health diagnosis. You can't even control the weather. I found that on Friday when my daughter's wedding was happening. Some people do pray and say to me, David, we got this event. Would you pray that the weather will be good? Like I got this sort of pipeline. My line is, I'm in sales, not management. That's what I would say. But we can't control it. We can't control the economy. You can't control difficult life situations or circumstances. There are times when life is out of control. And it's in those times when it's out of control and we're powerless and we can't handle it, we say, but you can. And we just transfer our trust over onto Jesus and say, you're powerful. You can handle it. You're in control. It's about handing it all over to him in confidence because of who he is. Wise, faithful, loving, powerful, sovereign. Peter gives us some instructions. Peter was in the boat that day. It's very fearful. But I think he thought back when he writes things like this. He thought back to those moments and he said, cast all your anxiety on him. And the idea of casting something here, it's the idea of taking a ball and throwing it to the other person. And in order to throw the ball, you've got to release and they got to catch. He's saying, taking that circumstantial ball where life is out of control, put your hands around it and toss it in Jesus' direction. Why? Why do we toss it there? Because he cares for you. It's not indifferent. He cares for you. He cares about every detail that you're going through. He says, cast me the ball. It can be so liberating, so life-changing. I mean, if you lose your job, you can turn to God and find confidence. If a husband or wife walks out, you can turn to God and find confidence. You fail the exam and you have no hope of post-grad. That's okay. You can turn it over to God and find confidence in Him. If the person of your dreams who you're in love with leaves you and falls in love with someone else, that's okay. You can have confidence and you can trust in Him. A major financial setback, it's okay because you can turn to God and find confidence in Him. If someone you love goes through a difficult time or a health issue, or you go through a health issue, you just say, I can go through this. I have confidence because I can turn it all over to Him. If your future looks dark and bleak, maybe because of a choice that you made out of fear, you can turn to God and find confidence in Him. It doesn't mean the storms will immediately stop, because sometimes they don't. But it's finding peace and to be still in the middle of the storm, because you know that even when life is out of control, He's still in control. And when you can't handle it, He can. And when you're powerless, He's powerful. And I think that when we do this and get this, it doesn't mean there won't be any fear, because it will be. We by nature fear. But in the future, as we face those situations and those storms, I think we have a lot less fear. And I think the good news is that we don't try to wrestle control of our lives anymore, but we just keep handing control over to Him. And right now, you might be in the middle of a storm, and your little boat is feeling like it's sinking, and you feel out of control. Maybe it's a relationship or a job or money or kids or your health or, I don't know, choice you made, something like that. And the storm winds are blowing. And your level of fear is quite high right now, and you're feeling overwhelmed. And it's remembering today this one lesson. When life is out of control, God is still in control. When you're powerless, He's powerful. When you can't handle it, He can. He's got it all figured out. And it starts by admitting first that life is out of control, because some of us are such control freaks we never want to admit that. And that some area of our lives is just not right, it's out of control. It's admitting that, saying, you know what? I can't do this anymore. Second thing is to admit that God is powerful enough to handle it. You can't, but He can. And then it's about turning our control of our lives over to God, because He can handle anything that life throws at us. And it's just let go and let God kind of ideal. And this can be so liberating and free for us, can it? It really can. And we can shake off some of those feelings of fear today. And here's where you'll see the immediate impact of giving control over to God. You'll see it in your relational world. You will. Because we know how hard relationships can be when someone tries to maintain control. Your relationships will be so much better when you learn to turn control over from you to God and let Him be in charge. It's time for some of us to let go of the myth that we can maintain control and grab hold of the truth that when life is out of control and we can't handle it and we're powerless, God is in control, He's powerful, and He can handle it fully. Because when we're willing to let go, and we're willing to let God be in control, it does something to our fear. It's time to let go of a myth and time to take hold of a reality that when you're out of control, God is in control. One of our Lakeside people are going to share their story now by video. And it's a season of their life when it felt like life was out of control, and yet you'll hear about fear and about God and how He worked in that situation. And when when the video is done, we're going to do a song, so don't leave early. You don't want to miss either of these pieces. And the song was written by a guy who's a familiar songwriter within the Christian world, and his wife was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And this is the song he wrote in response to that diagnosis. Listen to these two things, this testimony and this song, and I'll come out and wrap it up in just a few moments. Please turn your attention to the side screens.
Hi, my name is Emily. My husband, Zach, and our 3 children have attended Lakeside for over 4 years. Until last fall, we've been involved in the Alpha courses with Kids Crew and other various things around the church. When we reached the fall of 2013, our marriage hit a major wall, and my husband and I separated after being together for 10 years. This came on suddenly, and I found myself looking for what I call lifelines. I met with Pastor Dave and decided to start attending Celebrate Recovery, which transformed my life and my relationship with Jesus. About 2 months into our separation in November 2013, just as we had decided to have Zach move back into our home, I was taken to the hospital. I thought at that time that I had an inner ear infection, as I had a terrible headache, along with pressure in my head, as well as dizziness. After having a CAT scan and sitting in Emerge waiting for the results, I knew in my heart that it was more. Zach arrived at the hospital in time for the doctor to give me the news. I had a brain tumor. I was numb. At this point, I felt a calmness rush over me, and I listened as the doctor told me that it was very serious, that I definitely needed surgery, but that beyond that, they weren't sure. All I could think of was our kids, the new life we had been blessed with by God, and this journey of recovery and second chance. Why was this happening now after already going through such hardships? Immediately, they started me on strong medication to try and shrink the tumor and began to prepare in case they decided to do emergency surgery, as the doctors in Guelph weren't sure what the neurosurgeon in Hamilton was going to say. I just felt like God had wrapped me in his arms that first night, and Zach and I spent the night praying and trying to sleep as we mentally prepared ourselves for the hospital transfer that was happening the next day. What I heard the next day was that I was booked for surgery in 2 weeks, that I had a mass tumor in my right cerebellum, and it was aggressive, and it was getting bigger. It almost felt like a dream that this wasn't really happening. They had the wrong person. The next 2 weeks consisted of me praying, reading my Bible, and writing goodbye letters to Zach and our kids, as I didn't know what would happen. Everything during that time was intensified, and every moment so incredibly beautiful, as I didn't know if I would ever experience anything like that again. I spent most of that time just thanking God for his perfect timing, as I had my husband by my side and was emotionally, and more importantly, spiritually stronger than I had ever been. Even so, fear was always right there, and I fought hard to trust. Those 2 weeks were the scariest but most amazing 2 weeks of my life, as God kept me so close to him. I had never experienced anything like that in my life. I worked hard at handing it all over when I could, and repeated the words, "Be still," over and over, day and night. The night before my surgery was again incredibly hard, as I said goodbye to my kids, not knowing what the future would hold. Would I survive? Would I be the same person after the surgery? What if was a very scary way to start any discussion, as it was very vague answers that I would receive. On December 4th, 2013, the day of the surgery, it was so scary as I waited for the nurses to come and get me. I found out from a scan that morning that the tumor had grown to almost twice the size as when it was diagnosed. I was having the surgery at a perfect time. If it was scheduled any later, it would have been an emergency surgery. Again, God in his perfect timing. As I left my family members and then later said goodbye to my husband, it was so hard, but I knew that I had handed my life over to God. I remember my last thoughts as I went to sleep were thoughts of prayers to my Heavenly Father. When I woke up, I felt like I had been hit by a truck, but I insisted on smiling and thanking every nurse and doctor that even looked in my direction. I was so incredibly thankful to be feeling anything. Over the next months, I healed quickly and was told the tumor was benign, that they were able to remove the whole tumor, and that everything was looking good with my healing. Thank you, Jesus. I haven't mentioned yet how many people came forward to help, support, and pray for myself and my family during this time. This was a new situation for me, and I found it really uncomfortable to receive as opposed to giving. Through this experience, God has shown me many things, a few of them being the importance of both receiving and giving, the importance of community, and most importantly of love and his perfect timing in my life. Thank you for listening to my story.
As you sail on the sea, you could never seem to see that all of your dreams could be tossed in the waves and lost in the ocean, sinking in that sinking feeling. And as your world has stopped, it's turning, your heart stands still, hanging by this melody of life that hasn't lost its meaning. When you're lost at sea, I will be your shore. So hold on tight, your ship is going down. In the storm of life, I won't let you down. It'll be alright. right where the stars have left you dead in the cold and on your own. But I see a silver lining appear beyond the dark, beyond your fear. 'Cause you were never meant to do this alone. And when you're lost, I see I will be your shore. So hold on tight, your ship is going down. In the storm of life, I won't let you down. It'll be alright now if you just hold on. So just hold on, rescue has come. Through the storm, through the night, hold on to hope, I'll be your guide. And when the waves come crashing down, by your side is where I'll stay. So hold on tight, your ship is going down. In the storm of life, I won't let you drown. It'll be alright if you just hold on. So just hold on, rescue has come. Rescue has come. I will be your shore.
So maybe this morning you're here and you've got your own storm a-blowing. And you don't like it and you're filled with fear and life feels out of control and you don't know where to turn. And I'm just going to encourage you that it's time to transfer that trust, that confidence. It's to cast that storm, that care, whatever you're going through, it's time to cast it on the one who is powerful, in control, and he can handle it. It's not always an easy decision because we fight for control, but I'm encouraging you, whatever you're going through, to cast that care on him, for he cares for you. He loves you, and he can handle it. He can handle it. It may mean the storm might not go away. It might not. But he will give you a peace, be still inside you, right in the middle of it, that will transcend all understanding. There'll be some folks up here. If you want to pray with someone about the storm you're going through, come on forward. They'll pray with you. But before you leave, I'm just going to say a little prayer, and then we're done. Father God, thank you for today and for the reminder that in the storms of life, when we are out of control and feel powerless and can't handle it, thank you for the truth, the lesson that you taught those disciples and you teach your followers today, that when life is out of control, you are still in control. When we are powerless, you are powerful. When we can't handle it, you absolutely can. And so whatever our hearts are heavy with today, we hand it over to you. We trust completely and fully in you. And may through this day, this week, whatever the storm feels like, may we hear you gently whisper to our ears, peace, peace, be still. And may we feel the calming in our soul that only you can bring. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless. Have a great week.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed this message. To hear it again or other messages, please visit us at lakesidechurch.ca.